Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? If you're a bass player and you're playing live or doing a recording session, you have a lot of choices in terms of how you get your signal to the PA or to tape. I'm showing my age, to whatever recording medium there is, whatever digital audio workstation and what have you. And this video is really inspired by the tremendous amount of great comments and discussions I had the video I just recently put up where I was talking about what to expect as a bass player if you're dealing with a sound person. So thank you so much for those comments. There were a lot of great insight. It ranged the entire spectrum of preferences and a lot of experience was shared. So thanks again. That was really great to see all that because it's a huge topic. So you actually have several different options. You could simply put a microphone in front of the speakers of your amplifier and capture the signal that way. You could go through a direct box. No real processing, no real preamp in here, just a direct box. You could go through a preamplifier of some kind. You could go post EQ or pre-EQ, which when you go pre-EQ, you're pretty much going through a direct box, but I'll get back to that in a second. You can go through a modeler. And an all-in-one sort of amp modeler which has effects and maybe even like simulates cabinets, the whole 9 yards, and there's a whole bunch of those on the market. And let's see, did I say there was anything else you could do here? Well, you could go through a preamp that's a pedal rather than a rack mount. So that's really kind of cheating and saying it's another option when it's really just something on the floor, although there are things to consider when it comes to that as well. So first off, if you just put a microphone in front of your amplifier, in front of the speakers of your amplifier, you're going to capture what your amplifier actually sounds like. And that's good and that's bad. If you have a tone that you really like, well, you're going to get that. And it's going to very accurately, depending upon the microphone, pick up that signal and reproduce it. So that's great. Some of the downsides are, or the biggest downside really, is that the frequency response of your bass amplifier is not going to be the entire frequency response of your bass. The highs and the lows are going to get cut off. And I love the way that my speakers sound. I really enjoy the way my amp sounds, but I've been a bag end speaker fan for years. They sound great. However, I love that last octave too, and they don't do that well. And so I always like to have a direct signal going to the PA or to tape as well because it captures that last octave very, very well, and also some of the highs. In fact, the last recording session I did, we did two things. We had a microphone in front of a speaker, and we had a direct box, and it sounded great, and the guy could just mix the two of them and figure out where we were going with that. But that is definitely an option, and some people really spend a lot of time, picking the right amplifier equipment, picking the right speakers, and they've dialed in that tone, and that's their sound, and they want that sound to be captured. So that's an option, and hopefully you run to a PA where if they're going to take you direct and insist on that, you also mic up your amplifier. So that's something we can do. The next thing is we can just simply use a direct box. They're all the same and they're all different. They're pretty much just taking your signal, converting it into like a mic level, low level signal that can go to the board or PA and travel long distances. And these tend to be fairly accurate. They can sound radically different. This is a fine one. Probably, I forget what this costs, $120, $125. That's a great working one for a PA, and I put acoustic guitar through this and all kinds of stuff, or sometimes keyboards if it needs to go through there. It's a nice working one. If I was recording, I was really serious about getting the best possible tone, I might use something different. Depends. And I'm not here to talk about the zillion or DI boxes on the market. There is, like, say, the DI in like my Demeter over here, and it's got this Jensen balanced, DI, and it's a Jensen transformer, and it's got tubes, running part of it, I believe. So it sounds different than that does. I like the way it sounds better. It is what it is. But that's one of the options you can take. The other option is you can go through a preamp and take that same direct signal out, but have it post EQ. Now I did check, and my Demeter does have a post and pre EQ. All my preamps might have it. I don't know, maybe. And the reason I mentioned in the first video that very often the sound engineer will want to take the pre EQ one is because when you're twiddling the knobs and the tone controls to get your stage sound, that's going to affect what's going into the PA. However, I very often prefer that because I'm very judicious with what I'm doing tone-wise, and I kind of dial in a sound that I really like, and that's what I prefer to send to the PA. Just saying. But that's something you can do. That will get all the character of that preamp. And there are a lot of preamps on the market. There's a bunch of rack mount, and there are a bunch of floor mount preamps. There's too many to list. You know, I've had the Caveman Compact was wonderful. It had 2 controls, volume and gain. And I wish I still had it. I sold it for reasons, you know, regarding like how much gear did I really want to bring to a lot of gigs, and the fact that I needed to sell that to justify other purchases. I really want another one, because it put this stamp on the sound. It made it sound different. You know, and there are tons of, you can buy a Noble, you can buy all kinds of preamps that cost a lot of money and can put their own stamp on your sound, and it may be very, very pleasing. But once again, you're taking that direct signal, so you're taking the whole frequency response of your bass. So you're giving them that big, wide signal that they can use for the PA or use at the recording console. But once again, you're still putting your sound into it. The difference between the rack mount and the floor modelers is like the workflow. I personally prefer having something that I can reach back and twiddle the knobs and not bend over and twiddle the knobs. And maybe that's because of age. And sometimes your chords can actually turn the knobs by accident. I had a couple floor units that, you know, that was constantly a problem. So that's just something to consider. I personally like to have something up on something, even if it's not a speaker. I guess where the heck would I put it without an amplifier? But on something that I can reach back. This is absolutely 100% preference. It really has no real bearing. You may like it the other way. But that's something, a different way to get the signal to tape where you have a lot more control over the sound. Like, this is the sound I like. Here you go. Then you've got, let's see, what else? You've got the modelers. And there are a lot of modelers out there. I have a video where I talked about why I sold a Quad Cortex. It was a great unit. It really was. There's nothing wrong with it, and I would love to get another one. And a lot of people, some of the people that commented mentioned that they used a very popular HX Stomp. And these things like have a lot of advantages. You can have all kinds of effects on there as well, so it's not just a preamp. There are tons of preamp options in most of these, and if it's not in the unit, a lot of times you can capture them or take captures off the cloud that other people have done. And, you know, the only downside is you can't twiddle the actual knobs on the actual unit. So, but you can get various tones, and I actually uploaded a whole bunch of different settings from the Demeter that I'm looking at right here, and that's still up on the Quad Cortex cloud. So if you're a Quad Cortex owner, go download them. They actually sound really, really good. And once again, this is absolute preference on my part. I found that the workflow of the floor units and the modelers was less to my liking, because once again, I didn't actually have the controls of the actual, how many times can I say actual, preamp that I could mess with. And with something like, say, the Alembic, you know, it's passive interactive, so you're never going to get that in a modeler. And, you know, so even making basic tone controls, because it's on the floor, and yes, I try to put it on the amp, and you can kind of do it, but there's other issues with that. I'm not knocking them at all. This is actually a great way to get your signal on a signal that you want to the board. And it also has this other advantage of speaker modelers or speaker emulation. There's tons of speaker cabinets in most of these that you can choose. And you can even change like where the microphone is, the virtual mic is, to really get creative. And so once again, you can send them that sound. It does come with that same downside that actually miking up a real cabinet does, in that you're not setting the whole frequency response. However, that may be exactly what you want. You may want that compressed and very, you know, colored and affected sound based upon what would it sound like if I mic'd up a cabinet. There's no real wrong answer. These are just the ways that that work. Let me just see if I forget anything that I was going to talk about as far as the different options. And it's very much personal preference. Some people really, really like to send the pure signal, let the sound person handle it. Some people really enjoy the having their amplifier on stage and as a stage monitor, even if the PA can provide some you know, reliable bass signal through the monitors. On the other hand, some people don't want to have the amp anymore. You know, they've done it enough. They're, you know, a lot of them are my age. They don't want to do that. They're absolutely happy and pleased as punch to just bring the modeler, because they do, or people just do a whole bunch of gigs, and I do a whole bunch. But some guy was talking about doing at least 120 gigs a year, so that's a good. I think I did almost 90 last year, so it's still, you know, we're getting close. But you know, I get that idea, because bringing the stuff can be a pain. And he's lucky enough to play enough a bunch of gigs that have the house PA or the full PA for the venue, and that's awesome. So that's definitely an option. And of course, once again, that gives you a lot of tonal control where you're really controlling the sound that gets out there. So once again, there's no real right answer. There's a lot of preference. There's a lot of like what you can afford. There's a lot of what you're actually going to run into. A lot of shows I do, I need to bring an amp because it's not going through the PA, or I'm kind of going through the PA and it's reinforcing a little bit, but I need to have that for stage volume, or for the other musicians to hear me, or to like help the PA out with my rig. You may have other situations where you absolutely, don't want to have that, and that's the last thing you want. And you may have situations where you don't care about the control of the tone at all. Or it's something you don't need to mess with knobs. You're using that caveman like I talked about, where you just plug it in, and it sounds like that. And it sounds awesome. The Demeter just kind of sounds like the Demeter. I plug that in with all the tone controls set flat. Love it already. So, and so that's why I definitely want to send them the post EQ. And my very first gig ever that I played back in the 80s at the Grotto in New Haven, I didn't have an amplifier, and I plugged into a direct box, and it sounded fine. And the guy had the complete control over my tone. So you have tons of options. There's no real wrong answer. I really enjoyed the spectrum of answers and preferences that I got from people. So that was a great discussion. But yeah, you have a lot of options. It's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be a bass player.